Hi, welcome or welcome back. Today I'm going to be sharing 3 different ways to help you build a healthy relationship with your partner that I believe are underrated. And when I say healthy relationship, I mean a relationship where you feel loved, where you feel supported, and you feel fulfilled. A relationship where you and your partner still enjoy each other's company, regardless of how many years you've been together, and where you feel like a team as you navigate challenges so that you feel confident in your future together. I'll explain what these habits are, how you can implement them in your life, personal examples of how I've adopted them, and I'll share practical steps so that you can adopt them too so that they benefit you and your relationship. If you choose to implement just one of these, I bet that you will already see a positive influence in your relationship. By the way, this is part 1 of a very long series that I want to do because I believe there are so many other underrated habits that we don't talk enough about. So keep an eye here, keep an eye on other parts that I'm going to do. And I'm choosing not to go for quick fixes like this is what you should say in this situation. I'm actually going to share sustainable habits that are designed to set you up for success in the long run because it's like a new way of operating in your relationship. If you implement these, you'll never want to go back. They start to become second nature, they start to become ingrained, they start to give you a new way of operating, of functioning as a couple, and it just gives you so much more fulfillment, more peace of mind, and you overall just feel more supported and more understood. Now, you might find that some of these habits are easier to implement than others. That's okay, that's normal. Most relationship habits are like a muscle to build. It takes awareness, it takes intention, it takes effort, it takes repetition, it takes time to build a muscle. It takes time to see results when you start building that muscle and for it to become second nature. Just keep in mind that every single one of these 3 habits and the ones that I'm going to share with you in the future serves a purpose and is like a piece of the puzzle. As always, I'll leave timestamps in the description below so that you can easily refer back to these different habits anytime. And if you're new here, I'm Alex, a certified life and relationship coach and the face behind Toolbox for Love. I'm passionate about sharing what I know and what I continue to learn along the way about how to build a healthy relationship so that you have the tools to navigate the complexities of love and create the love that you deserve. All right, let's get into the first underrated way to help you build a healthy relationship with your partner. Habit number 1. This one I had no idea about just 4 years ago, and it's one that I see more and more people talk about, so I hesitated even starting with it, but then I get reminded that as soon as I share it with friends or with clients, it's new to them and it adds so much value in their relationship. And that's cycle syncing. The concept of cycle syncing is when as a woman, you adapt your lifestyle and your habits, for example, your diet or your exercise routine, to match the phases of your menstrual cycle. And when it comes to relationships, it's how you and your partner take your cycle into account in your day-to-day life and interactions. So whether you have a menstrual cycle or are dating someone who has one, you'll want to know about cycle syncing. Later, I'll share what the cycle looks like for men. To understand cycle syncing, you need to know that a woman typically goes through a cycle of 28 days. And within those 28 days, our hormones fluctuate, which impacts our mood, which impacts our body, which impacts our energy levels, our appetite, all of those things. And within those 28 days, we go through 4 different phases: the menstruation phase, the follicular phase, the ovulation phase, and the luteal phase. Each phase has different characteristics, and it can literally feel as if you're a different woman every single week, and sometimes every single day, depending on how your hormones fluctuate. Now, to help you cycle sync, let me first explain what goes on in each phase. The first phase is the menstruation phase, and that starts the first day of your period. That's typically when you feel lower on energy because your hormone levels, especially estrogen and progesterone, are at their lowest. This phase typically lasts about 1 to 5 days. Of course, it depends on the woman, and some women experience longer periods. Then when your period ends, you enter the second phase called the follicular phase. The body here is preparing you for the third phase, which is ovulation. Here, your estrogen levels rise, which means that you typically experience more energy, you feel like your mood has improved, you feel like you can think more clearly, you feel more optimistic. So in this phase, you feel much better than the first one, and it typically lasts about a week. Now, if we take these 28 days, the third phase is typically in the middle. That's around day 14. That's when you're most fertile. That is called ovulation. It's when a mature egg from your ovary gets released. Some women experience some discomfort when that happens, but you still typically feel high on energy, you feel motivated, and you feel overall good. And the fourth phase of your cycle is called the luteal phase. If there's no pregnancy, your hormone levels will start to drop, which means that you'll generally feel more tired, and that leads you to then have your period, which starts your cycle again. And this phase typically lasts another week or 10 days. Now that you have a brief breakdown of each phase, you need to know that in each phase you have different needs. different phases equals different needs, and cycle syncing means that you take those needs into account. For so long, I personally worked against my cycle, meaning that I didn't listen to what my body needed, and I didn't look at the different phases, I didn't understand my cycle, and I didn't really pay much attention to how I was doing throughout the month. I just thought I had to function the same every single day until I realized that that's not how a woman's body works. And I've been diagnosed with PCOS, endometriosis, and a leaky gut. So if you're like me, not only do your hormones fluctuate naturally throughout your cycle, but you also have hormonal imbalances which can add an extra layer to the fluctuations that you experience. So many of my clients look for peace of mind when we start working together, and cycle syncing is one way to help you get there. If we can work with our cycle, we're doing ourselves and our relationship a huge favor. Okay, let's look at one example of how to adopt cycle syncing in your relationship. You might have heard of the term PMS, premenstrual syndrome, where right before your period, you start to feel less patient. You have cramps, you feel tired, you might feel more anxious, you might have cravings, and you might generally feel more overwhelmed. So if you feel extra anxious one day and you have maybe lots of doubts about your relationship, you might, for example, want to check where you are at in your cycle before making any decisions. Dennis and I, for example, have this rule in our relationship that when I'm on my period or I'm about to have my period, I don't make big decisions because I'm just different in my mindset. I'm different in the way that I look at things, and I generally have a more negative outlook on things. And so just before or right when I start my period, I don't make big life decisions. I don't make decisions in my business. And I generally just take a little bit more of a hands-off approach. I'm not full in taking decisions about what I should do and what my life should look like and my future, all of that, because I typically make different decisions when I'm about to have my period or when I have my period than when I'm in the other phases. So knowing where you're at helps you take a step back and have some understanding about the situation instead of, for example, guilting yourself for feeling a certain way or taking a very harsh decision that you might later regret, or then even maybe feeling more anxious because you don't know what to do and you don't know why you're feeling a certain way. Now, your cycle isn't the only thing that you need to look at, but it does have a huge impact on how you show up. So instead of feeling like your emotions, your behaviors, your thoughts are out of your control, cycle syncing helps you understand and support yourself in a way that feels in your control. We're looking at what you can do and what you need. To me, working with my cycle means that I, for example, ask Dennis to be extra patient when I start to sense these PMS symptoms. I can lose my patience in those moments. I can be extra sensitive. I can say sometimes things the wrong way just because they're coming up and I feel extra reactive. So instead of feeling like that's totally outside of my control, I can go, all right, this is where I'm at in my cycle. This is what I need. This is how I'm feeling. And then I can communicate that with Dennis. I can go, this is what I need in this moment. And so that helps me feel more supported, and it helps him as well. It helps him understand me better. It helps him not take things personally. It helps him remember that this is a phase and have an idea of how he can best support me instead of being confused because he's trying different things and it's not really what I need. We function so much better now that we're aware of these different phases and are open about them. Plus, now that we're digital nomads and we're traveling around the world for an indefinite time, cycle syncing means that we plan what we'll be doing throughout the month, what activities we do, where we travel to, etc., based on the different phases that I'm going through. If I know more or less when I'm going to be on my period, we can avoid, for example, diving, or we can avoid big hikes because I know I'm going to be tired and will just need facilities in a different way than when I'm not on my period. We're not always able to time things perfectly, but we try our best because it helps us manage our expectations. It helps us be more in sync. Instead of me, for example, getting resentful or being extra tired because we're doing these big activities on days where I need rest, and that causing tension that leads to disconnection that could have been avoided in the first place. I personally use an app called Flow, F-L-O, to track my cycle, and I'm not sponsored by it. I just find it really convenient, easy to use, and really visual. If you have the app, you can simply log in the first day of your period, tell the app that that's the first day, and it'll give you a forecast of the month. It will tell you, for example, how long your period is expected to last. It will tell you what symptoms you could be expecting. So it's really visual, it's really easy, and it's really just overall convenient to look at and to start tracking your cycle in a way that feels manageable. You can also put custom notes on the app, for example, how you're feeling, so that you can keep track of things and start to see patterns. And if you're like me and you sometimes forget how you were the past month or even 2 months ago, and you go to the doctor, you can provide so much more accurate information because everything is on there. And honestly, it's been much more handy than I thought. Then, as part of cycle syncing and to support myself personally, I, for example, don't pack my schedule with in-person meetings or social events anymore during my period, but rather make those a priority during my ovulation phase or the second phase of my cycle. Again, it's not always possible to make these adjustments, but I try my best because I see a massive difference when I actually respect this one. I also avoid processed foods when I have cramps because they make the cramps worse. Or I prioritize different types of workouts depending on the phase that I'm in. For example, I will go more on walks rather than runs if I'm just about to have my period. I will also try to go to bed earlier when I feel like I have less energy, when I need a little bit more sleep because I'm in a certain phase of my cycle. And I take supplements like omega-3 to support my hormonal health throughout the month, and have worked on repairing my leaky gut with other supplements. So not only do I feel more supported by Dennis, but I'm doing a much better job at taking care of me. And that means that I feel better emotionally, physically, mentally, and that has positive effects on our relationship. It's a two-way street. I know we don't always have the luxury of making all of the adjustments we want to make, but even small adjustments here and there can really be very supportive. For context, as a man, your hormones fluctuate as well, but differently. If we take, for example, your testosterone levels, which influences your mood, your energy levels, regulates your metabolism, etc., they go through a 24-hour cycle. That's as if you had a reset every single 24 hours. This is me generalizing here just to keep it simple. Of course, every single person is unique, and it can change from one person to another, but it is to show you the differences that there can be with our partner and the importance of how our hormones fluctuate. I believe that talking about our cycles should be standard in a relationship. If not, it's like we're missing such an important piece of the puzzle. So I encourage you to learn about the 4 different phases of your menstrual cycle, or learn about your partner's phases so that you feel more supported and you can determine how to support each other the best throughout the month. I've had clients, friends, family members share how life-changing it was to know about their cycle and include their partner in the conversations instead of it being taboo, instead of it being something unimportant or just something that they weren't aware of. And even if you don't have your period as a woman because maybe you're on a specific birth control pill, I know that changed a lot for me, you can still communicate how you're doing throughout the month. We can't assume we're the same every single day, every single month. We're just not machines. It helps us and our partners so much to know where we're at emotionally, physically, mentally, because we can't assume that we'll always know what's going on for each other every single time. So before we go into the second habit, let me recap 5 things that you can do walking away from this. First, download the app Flow, or something similar if you prefer. Then log the first and the last day of your period to make sure that it's taking your specific cycle into account for future forecasting. And 3, take note of how you're doing throughout the month. On the app, you have these labels, so it's really easy to just click on them. You can go, for example, I'm tired, or I'm energized, or I have high libido, or I'm irritated, or I'm bloated. Whatever it is that you're feeling, that you're experiencing, you literally have these different labels and you can just click on them so that you have a list depending on the day and you can look back on that. 4, communicate with your partner what you're noticing about yourself and how they can best support you on that day or that week or that phase of your cycle. For example, you could go, I'm feeling extra tired this week. Could you help me with XYZ? Next week, I should have more energy, so we could plan something nice together. What do you think? And 5, repeat that every single month so that you can start having a better understanding of yourself. You can start seeing patterns, which will help you then work even better with your cycle. If you don't have a menstrual cycle, but your partner has, this could be a really great opportunity to bring the topic up with the intention of understanding and supporting them much better. Cycle syncing helps you both because you'll be more in tune with each other. Another underrated habit to help you build a healthier relationship with your partner is to break unhealthy generational cycles. And this is something that I see more and more clients want to do. Breaking an unhealthy generational cycle means that you are deciding not to continue a certain behavior, a certain pattern, a certain habit that has been passed on from your family to you. You're doing this for your benefit, for the benefit of the relationship, and for the benefit of your own kids if you decide to have kids. And I'll explain what I mean in a second. Even if your family had the best of intentions and you grew up in a pretty healthy environment, there is still a chance that you picked up things unconsciously that are now preventing you from building a healthy relationship. When we're kids, our parents are literally like architects of our brain. What we observe and what we experience shapes us. It shapes our thinking, our coping mechanisms, our behaviors. Even if today we're very different from our parents, they have likely shaped us in more ways than we think. Generational cycles are like these invisible chains that run through families. Patterns repeat, even the unhealthy ones, and that's whether we are conscious about them or not. To break an unhealthy generational cycle, we need to become aware of how we're showing up in our relationship on a day-to-day basis. To help you build that awareness, you can ask yourself questions like, what emotions do I often experience? And how do I manage my emotions, including the ones that I typically don't like to feel? That could be anger, sadness, anxiety. And then how do I respond when there's conflict? What do I make situations mean? What do I typically focus on? what do I believe about relationships and what do I believe about myself? Then you can start to identify what parts are influenced by your past, how much of the way that you're showing up today is influenced by your past experiences or by the people that you have observed at home, and then decide what isn't serving you. And when I say isn't serving you, I mean anything that doesn't help you live the life that you want, that is maybe causing more anxiety than peace of mind, that is making you miserable, that is making you depressed, that is keeping you stuck in the same cycles, that is keeping you stuck in situations that you don't want to be in. For example, if your parents or one of them avoided conflict, there's a chance that you might not know what healthy conflict looks like. So you might avoid it altogether. You might not voice your needs. You might actually think that conflict is bad. And so today you might be really good at going with the flow and you're perceived as an easygoing person, but sometimes you leave things under the rug. You might, for example, be avoiding really important conversations with your partner, for example, where you each see your future, or what's important to you, what you each need, because you don't want that to potentially turn into a fight. If you look at your relationship right now and you imagine your own kid watching you, or you imagine a very young version of yourself, let's say 5 to 6 years old, watching you, would you want them to have the same relationship that you have today? Would you be proud of what they're seeing? And if you imagine for a second that there's this 90-year-old version of you sitting next to you right now, would they be happy for you? If the answer is no, you likely need to break some sort of unhealthy cycle. This isn't to blame anyone from your past or yourself right now, but rather to take accountability and go, what have I experienced at home that I see myself repeating now that I don't want to repeat because it's not serving me, and what do I want instead? Instead of avoiding conflict, you want to be open, you want to be authentic, you want to be able to handle conflict in constructive ways because you want a relationship that feels fulfilling. You don't want to just tolerate anything, and you don't just always want to go with the flow at the expense of your own needs. So breaking the unhealthy generational cycle of avoiding conflict means that you, for example, start to identify your own needs. You work on identifying those needs rather than suppressing them. You also practice voicing your needs and concerns in constructive ways. You also practice having the courage of having the tough conversations in the short run because they're important to you in the long run. You learn to reach agreements with your partner instead of doing things their way just to avoid tension or to avoid feeling like a burden. You also learn how to repair after a fight, meaning that you know how to resolve conflict, you know how to leave a conversation, a difficult conversation, still feeling like a team, and you learn to manage your emotions so that if things get out of hand, you still feel in control. You still feel like you can handle your emotions. You still feel like you can handle the situation in a way that helps you and your partner still feel like a team and not like enemies. And you do that even if it's uncomfortable now because you want to be proud of yourself. You want to have peace of mind. You want to feel empowered. You want to give yourself a chance to actually be happy in your relationship. And if you decide to have kids, you want them to see what healthy conflict looks like. Breaking unhealthy generational cycles helps us build healthier relationships because we're learning how to be healthier partners. We're learning how to improve the dynamics of the relationships, the way that we interact with our partner. And healthy relationships have a positive effect on our immune system, on our overall health, and our happiness levels. If you look at this image here I'm putting on the screen, maybe you had a parent who was very critical and who often told you that you weren't good enough, and now you understand that that's how they grew up as well. Even if you love your parent and they were generally good to you, you might still notice all sorts of consequences in your life from the fact that they were critical. For example, maybe today you're very harsh on yourself. Maybe you have a lot of anxiety. Maybe you have low self-esteem. Maybe you are critical and perfectionistic towards your partner. And so you decide that that's something you want to change. You can have compassion for a parent, understand where they came from, understand that they might have not known how to show up differently with you, and still decide to not continue to behave the same way as they did. That is you setting a healthy boundary. So that pattern of being critical and seeing what's not good enough is not something that you want to pass on to your kids. It's not something you want for yourself, and it's not something that you see benefiting your relationship. You want to speak to yourself with more kindness. You want to feel confident. You want to be loving towards your partner, and you would want your kids to also feel confident and speak to themselves with more kindness. So that's another example of breaking an unhealthy generational cycle. It's when you become aware of how you show up in your relationship, notice the unhealthy cycles that you might be repeating, commit to breaking those unhealthy cycles that aren't serving you, that you truly give yourself a chance to build a healthy relationship with someone and a healthier relationship with yourself. Again, the question you want to ask yourself, and the one that I'm leaving you with today, is what have I experienced at home that I see myself repeating, that I don't want to repeat because it's not serving me, and what do I want instead? The third habit is interdependence. Interdependence is your ability to function independently as a human being, so you don't just depend on your partner, and it's your capacity to still accept enough influence from them that you function as a couple. It's not I can function without you so I don't need you, and it's not I can't function without you either. It's I am a worthy human being that is confident and capable of functioning on my own, so if you decide to not be with me or decide to not make efforts, I respect myself enough to not just tolerate anything, but I'm also open and flexible to making us work. That means that I might sometimes do things a bit differently than if I were single. Being flexible and open doesn't mean that you mold yourself to your partner, that you lose your sense of self, that you always do things their way. You're independent enough that you know your worth, you know what your needs are, your limits, your standards in a relationship, and you're relational at the same time. Being relational means that you, for example, take your partner's input into account, even if that means doing something a bit differently than how you would have initially done them. Or you pick up an activity that your partner really likes so that you can spend more time together. Or you pick up a habit that you value from your partner. For example, if they're really good at filling up their own cup, and that's something that you might be lacking, then how about you look at how they do things and you learn from them? Would I have moved to Singapore over 2 years ago if it weren't for Dennis? Not really, but I was willing to build a life together after so many years of long distance. I knew what moving abroad meant, I was aware of the sacrifices, and I was okay with it. Or would I be a digital nomad today if I weren't with Dennis? Probably not, because I really love my stability, so as much as this was a common decision, I don't know if I would have taken the exact same decision if I were on my own. So there are things I do because I'm in a relationship, but it doesn't mean that I depend on my partner or that I'm doing things against my will. There needs to be a healthy amount of influence that we're open to from our partner, and I'll explain why in a bit. To help you understand what healthy influence is, there's this example that keeps coming up to mind, that is me going on vacation at the beach before I met Dennis compared to now. Vacation at the beach for me meant relaxing. It meant sitting in the sun the whole day. It meant going for a quick swim, but really not long. It meant eating and sleeping. That for me was the perfect vacation, and that to me was paradise. When Dennis and I started to go on vacation at the beach together, I noticed how much he loved to do things. He would be in the water, he would be snorkeling, or he would want to go on a walk, or he would want to go to the city. So he was very focused on doing things. He then suggested at some point that I go snorkeling with him, and when he discovered diving, he was like, why not also try diving? And so I had never thought that I would start diving, but I got my certificate. I was like, why not? Just keep an open mind, try it. And I realized how much I actually enjoyed it. I didn't enjoy it right away because of a traumatic experience, but I was like, all right, this aside, I can still try and I can still get over my fears and see if I still enjoy it. Now, every time we go to the beach, we always have a few days where we go diving. That has become a common activity, and if you follow me on Instagram or have watched a few of my content here, you know that we don't have many common interests. And so this has actually been a really enjoyable common activity. If I weren't enjoying diving or doing activities, and I was just doing it because Dennis wanted to and because that's what he enjoyed, I would be molding myself to the relationship. I would be doing things at the expense of my own needs, and that creates resentment over time. There needs to be healthy compromise and a sense of openness. We can spend time together and do things as a couple, and then we can also find pockets where we do things separately, where we do things our own way, where we do things that are just different from each other because that's what we need. Now, there are two common mistakes that prevent us from reaching interdependence. On one extreme, it's being so individualistic that it's my interest over yours, with little flexibility and little room to adapt, to reach agreements, and to compromise. I know that through experiences we can become more individualistic. We learn to not depend on others, we learn to not trust them fully, and that's usually because we've been hurt. The thing is that if we want a healthy relationship and we're too individualistic, there will at some point be one person in the relationship who will wonder why they're even in the relationship in the first place. They might feel left out or lonely or disconnected, resentful, and that neither serves you nor your partner. If you have this tendency to be individualistic, you need to learn how to negotiate with your partner. You need to learn how to reach agreements. You need to practice listening to them, and not just listening to them to then respond, but actually actively listen to them to understand them. You need to be willing to accept a point of view, even if it's different from yours. And you need to learn how to be vulnerable so that you can create a deep connection. Relationships are risky by nature because we can't control the outcome. We might get vulnerable with someone. We might actively listen to them. We might accept a point of view. and the relationship might still not work out. There are cases where, of course, that's true. Of course, we cannot control that if we're going to be vulnerable, it will always turn out in our favor. But again, that is the nature of a relationship. It is risky, there is uncertainty. We don't know how our partner will behave. We don't know how they will respond. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. That is the nature of a relationship, and that's why it can be really complicated. But you can increase your chances of building a healthy relationship with someone if you're focused on how you're interacting as a team, how you're functioning as a team, rather than just looking at how you're doing individually. We're not meant to function alone. We naturally need others, and we thrive in community. If you just look at how they use solitary confinement as a form of torture in prisons, that already tells you a lot. If you look at studies done with moms and their kids, where the moms are interacting with their babies, and as soon as they stop, the baby starts to get really distressed, that shows you how much we're wired for connection. We have this natural need to connect, and again, we thrive in community. And the second mistake is on this other extreme, when you're so attached to the relationship that you start to lose yourself as an individual. This has been my personal challenge and something that I've worked on a lot, because if I'm not aware of how I'm showing up, I typically go with the flow and I adapt myself very quickly to people to the point of not knowing what I want. So questions I got to ask myself to cultivate my independence were, for example, what are my hobbies? What are things that I love to do outside the relationship? Do I maintain friendships and family connections? What do I need in a situation regardless of Dennis's needs and his preferences, and do I communicate that? Am I comfortable spending time alone, and do I enjoy my own company? If Dennis and I weren't together anymore, could I still function as a human being, or would I completely come crashing down? So how much of myself and my self-worth is tied to the relationship? And am I setting and pursuing personal goals that are different from Dennis's goals and are different from the goals that we have as a couple? When Dennis isn't working or spending time with me, he loves to play video games. And that became a source of frustration that led to these deep, complex conversations that eventually led to the same question. What do I do with my free time? What do I do when he's doing his own thing and I'm not working? To be honest, I didn't have much of an answer at the time because I didn't have this go-to activity like he did. So I would get resentful, I would get really frustrated, and that would lead to big arguments. I've learned that it's unhealthy to expect one person to meet all our needs and to meet them all the time. We need different ways to meet our needs and to fill our cup. Through our different conversations, I realized how little things I had outside the relationship, and so I started to take singing classes. I started to read fiction books. I started to go on more solo walks. Those are ways that I now fill my cup, and it helps us maintain a healthy balance between time together and time alone. It helps us reduce arguments, and I personally feel much more fulfilled. If you don't have much independence, you lose your identity, and a loss of identity means a lack of boundaries, lower self-esteem, and dissatisfaction in the long run. You are in a relationship because you each add value to it in different ways. Interdependence helps us feel connected to our partner because it feels like we're in this together. We find ways for both of us to feel fulfilled, and we're each contributing to the well-being of the relationship while still maintaining a healthy sense of self, while still being able to function independently. For example, we know what we need, we know what we want, we know what our boundaries are, we know what our personal interests are, and that is us being able to function independently. If again we're too independent, there's little connection to our partner and little room for growth as a couple. And if we're too dependent, there's an unhealthy amount of pressure on one person to fulfill our needs. We risk tolerating things that aren't okay. We might prioritize the other person's needs at the expense of our own, and that leads to anxiety, to stress, to frustration, and eventually to resentment. So there is a fine line to find. Relationships can get hard and complex, so I really hope that these 3 habits help you navigate the complexities of love, feeling empowered and not confused. Let me know in the comments if you plan to implement one of these habits, or if you already do. Like if you learned something, and subscribe if you want to be notified for the next part of the series. All right, thank you so much for watching. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you in the next one.